The morning was still when Edna Brooks woke up gasping for air. Her chest felt tight, like someone had tied a belt around her ribs. She tried to take a deep breath, but it came out in short, thin gasps. The room spun. "Lord," she whispered, clutching her nightgown, "not again." Her neighbor called an ambulance. By the time they reached Baltimore General Hospital, her fingertips had gone cold. She could barely hold her ID card when the paramedic handed it to the admitting nurse. "Name?" the nurse asked. "Edna Brooks," she croaked. "EDA." They scanned her insurance card and wristed her with a bright orange band that blinked with a small green light. "There you go, Miss Brooks," the nurse said. "You're in the system." Edna tried to smile. "Long as the system's in me too, baby." They wheeled her into the waiting area. Dozens of chairs, monitors blinking, the soft hum of machines pretending to care. A large digital screen on the wall displayed names and wait times. Her eyes caught her own name. Brooks, Edna, status, non-urgent, tier C. Her heart sank. She turned to the young nurse sitting at the counter. "Miss, I think there's a mistake. I can't breathe." The nurse frowned. "It says your risk score is low, ma'am. The system prioritizes higher risk cases first." "What system?" "Care rank," she said, pointing at the screen. "It analyzes your file, symptoms, and background. Helps us triage faster." Edna blinked. "Baby, I can't even spell triage, but I can tell you I'm about to pass out." The nurse bit her lip. "I'm sorry, ma'am, I can't override it." An hour passed, then two. Each breath became a small battle. She leaned forward, trying to ease the pressure in her chest. Across the room, a young man groaned loudly, holding his side. Within minutes, a nurse called his name. "Mr. White, come with us." Edna whispered under her breath, "He walked in here. I can barely sit up." Her voice didn't carry far enough for anyone to hear. By the third hour, her daughter Marcia burst through the doors, coat half buttoned, fear written all over her face. "Mama," she shouted, "why are you still out here?" "They said I'm non-urgent. Guess the machine don't like my zip code." Marcia's face hardened. "What machine?" A nurse pointed nervously toward the triage desk. "It's the new AI. Care Rank sorts patients by risk score. Your mom's file came up low." Marcia glared. "Low? She's 78 with COPD. What's lower than breathing wrong?" The nurse lowered her voice. "It uses insurance data too. Sometimes the algorithm misreads." "Misreads?" Marcia snapped. "She's not a typo. She's my mother." Finally, after 3 hours and 17 minutes, Edna slumped forward in her chair. Her body went still. A panicked shout cut through the air. "Code blue, waiting area." Dr. Green rushed in, barking orders. "Get her on a gurney, now!" Monitors beeped, oxygen tubes hissed, hands moved fast. Her wristband flickered red as they scanned it. Tier C, non-urgent. Dr. Green cursed under his breath. "Who classified this?" A young intern stammered, "The system did, sir. It flagged her as stable." "Well, the system was wrong," he said, pressing on Edna's chest. "She's in respiratory failure." They revived her after 9 long minutes. When she finally came to, the first thing she saw was that same wristband blinking softly on her arm. She raised it weakly. "This little thing almost killed me." Dr. Green sighed. "It shouldn't have happened, Mrs. Brooks. The AI made an error." "Error?" she whispered. "That's what you call not breathing?" He hesitated. "The algorithm uses demographic data, age, address, insurance, to predict risk. It shouldn't have—" "Predicted my death?" she interrupted. "Well, I guess it was half right." Later that evening, as Marcia sat by her mother's bedside, she studied the wristband again. The barcode, the glowing chip, the little letters CR214. It looked harmless, but she knew better. That thing decided you didn't matter, she said quietly. Edna closed her eyes. No, baby. Somebody built a thing that decided that. Machines don't make choices. People do. The next morning, Naomi, the nurse who'd first checked her in, stopped by with a cup of tea. She looked ashamed. I just wanted to say I'm sorry, Miss Brooks. I saw the tag, but the rules say we can't override care rank without approval. Edna looked at her kindly. You did what they trained you to do. That's the problem. Naomi nodded, tears brimming. They said the new system makes everything fair. Edna smiled faintly. Fair ain't the same as right, honey. Edna Brooks survived the night, but her faith in the system didn't. That small orange wristband was supposed to identify her. Instead, it erased her. One risk score, one data point, one quiet dismissal at a time. Next, Marcia begins digging into how care rank really works and learns that what nearly killed her mother wasn't a glitch, but a pattern, an algorithm designed to value efficiency over humanity. Marcia Brooks had worked in insurance long enough to know one thing. When people said the system, what they really meant was someone's spreadsheet. 2 days after her mother's collapse, she sat in the hospital cafeteria with a laptop, a black coffee, and a fury that kept her awake better than caffeine ever could. She typed the name of the program printed on her mother's wristband, Care Rank AI. The company website loaded with glossy blue banners and smiling nurses. A tagline glowed across the screen. Saving time, saving lives, smarter triage for the modern hospital. Marcia muttered, yeah, well, 1 out of 2 ain't bad. She clicked into the technical description. Care Rank claimed to predict patient urgency using over 200 real-time data points. It analyzed medical history, lab results, insurance type, address, and behavioral reliability indicators. That last phrase stopped her cold. She clicked for more. Behavioral reliability indicators include appointment compliance, prescription refill rates, and address stability. She sat back in disbelief. So you get a lower score if you've ever moved or missed a refill? She laughed bitterly. Guess being poor just became a pre-existing condition. She dug deeper, pulling up the public pilot study that had helped sell the system. Buried in the fine print was a small line. Patients in lower socioeconomic zones show statistically lower triage urgency, correlating with reduced resource expenditure. Marcia whispered to herself, reduced resource expenditure? That's corporate talk for saving money by letting people wait. Her stomach twisted as she read the next part. AI calibration trained on historical triage data from private insurance networks. Her eyes widened. Private insurance networks, she repeated. So this thing learned from hospitals that already treated rich patients faster. Later that morning, she printed the report and brought it to Dr. Green, the physician who'd saved her mother's life. He looked exhausted, sitting behind a desk stacked with paperwork. When Marcia dropped the report in front of him, he rubbed his eyes. I knew it was bad, he said quietly, but I didn't know it was this bad. He flipped through the pages. The algorithm ranks patients based on predicted recoverability. That's the term they use. Basically, if you're older, poorer, or have chronic illness, your score drops because your case is less cost-effective. Marcia stared at him. So it's not deciding who's sickest, it's deciding who's cheapest. He nodded grimly. That's one way to put it. That afternoon, she met Naomi Ellis, the admitting nurse who had checked Edna in. They sat outside under the gray Baltimore sky, the wind carrying the smell of antiseptic and coffee. Naomi spoke softly. The new system came in 2 months ago. They told us it would make everything fair, no bias, no favoritism. But since then, it's been chaos. Every patient from the east side of town gets Tier C, even when they're gasping for air. East side, Marcia repeated. That's where Mama lives. Naomi nodded. The system reads zip code 21217 as high risk for no-shows, low insurance coverage, and poor outcomes. That translates to low priority. Marcia shook her head. So the machine looks at where you live and decides how much your life is worth? Naomi's voice cracked. I've watched people sit in the waiting room while their vitals crashed. But the policy says if the AI score is below 0.5, we have to wait for supervisor approval to move them up. Marcia clenched her fists. And by the time they get approval? Naomi's eyes filled with tears. Sometimes it's too late. That night, Marcia couldn't sleep. She scrolled through online forums where healthcare workers whispered about similar systems. Some called them invisible insurance adjusters. Others just called them digital redlining. A doctor from Chicago had written, "These systems say they save lives, but all they really save is paperwork." Marcia sat back in her chair. "Mama almost died because of paperwork," she whispered. She looked at her mother, sleeping soundly in the hospital bed beside her, oxygen lines still in place. The wristband was gone now, replaced with a simple white tag that said, "Human verified." She smiled sadly. About time. The next morning, Marcia met Dr. Omar Bell, a bioethicist from Johns Hopkins who had read about Edna's story in the local paper. "I've been studying these systems for years," he said. "Care rank isn't unique. It's part of a growing trend. Predictive healthcare, they call it. Hospitals claim it helps them allocate resources efficiently, but what it really does is bake old biases into new code." He leaned forward. "When you automate judgment, you don't remove prejudice. You just hide it behind math." Marcia nodded slowly. "Then I guess it's time we drag the math into the light." Care rank wasn't evil. It was obedient. It followed its data. Data that said people like Edna Brooks were less likely to afford recovery, less likely to follow up, less likely to matter. It didn't make that world. It just learned from it. And that's how systems built to predict care end up predicting neglect. Next, Marcia confronts hospital leadership, demanding accountability, and uncovers the internal memo that proves her mother's low priority tag wasn't a glitch, but a business strategy. 2 days later, Marcia walked into the administrative wing of the hospital, a folder under her arm and her jaw set tight. She wasn't here as a daughter this time. She was here as a woman who worked inside the system and had finally seen what it looked like from the outside. The carpet smelled of lemon cleaner. Behind the glass walls, people moved quietly, typing, filing, pretending not to see her. She found the plaque she was looking for. Director of Operations, Michael Lang. She knocked once, didn't wait for an answer, and pushed the door open. "Miss Brooks," he said, forcing a smile, "I heard your mother's recovering. That's good news." Marcia placed her folder on his desk. "Not for you, it isn't." He blinked. "Excuse me?" She opened the folder and laid out the printed care rank documents she'd found online, the ones listing income, insurance, and zip code as part of the hospital's urgency algorithm. "This system you installed, it nearly killed my mother, and she's not the only one." Lang adjusted his tie. "Miss Brooks, I understand your emotions are high, but we've seen tremendous efficiency gains." "Efficiency?" she snapped. "Is that what you call letting old women suffocate in your waiting room?" His face flushed. "Now that's an exaggeration." Marcia leaned forward. "You want to talk exaggeration? My mother's low priority tag said she could wait 3 hours. She lasted 2.5 before collapsing." He opened his mouth to speak, but she wasn't finished. "I work in insurance, Mr. Lang. I know what predictive models are. They're just ways to hide bias behind spreadsheets." Dr. Green entered the office then, his face tight with exhaustion. "Marcia," he said gently, "I told you I filed a report about the incident. They're investigating." Lang nodded. "Yes, yes, an internal review is underway." Marcia glared at them both. "An internal review? The same people who designed the system are going to investigate it? That's like asking the wolf to write a report on the missing sheep." Dr. Green rubbed his forehead. "We're required to follow protocol." Marcia slammed the folder shut. "Protocol is why she almost died." Lang tried to stay calm. "Care rank is federally approved. It follows the latest healthcare efficiency guidelines. We can't just turn it off because of one incident." Marcia's voice dropped to a low, controlled tone. "It's not one incident. I've talked to nurses. I've read the data. It's hundreds, maybe thousands of people marked non-urgent because they're poor, old, or live in the wrong neighborhood." Dr. Green sighed. "She's right." Lang turned sharply. "Doctor?" "No," Dr. Green said, his voice rising. "I'm tired of pretending this is fine. I've seen 3 patients from the same zip code collapse in my ER in the last month. Every one of them flagged as Tier C." Lang looked cornered. "Doctor, you're out of line." "And you're out of humanity," Dr. Green said. There was a long silence. Marcia broke it by sliding one more sheet of paper across the desk. "This is your own memo," she said, "from your email archive. It's dated 2 weeks before my mother's hospitalization." Lang froze. "Where did you get that?" "It's public now," she said. "The Washington Ledger published it this morning." The memo subject line read, "Projected cost savings by risk score tier, Q3 forecast." And below it, one line in bold, "Implementing automated triage reduces total ER expenditures by 24% in low-income regions." Lang's voice cracked. "That doesn't mean—" "It means you built a system that saves money by making sure people like my mother get help last." Later that day, the hospital's press office released a statement. "We take these allegations seriously. Care rank has improved patient outcomes overall, though minor anomalies persist." "Minor anomalies?" Marcia muttered as she watched the news. "That's what they call people like Mama." That evening, she sat by her mother's bedside again. Edna was awake, sipping tea slowly, her breathing steadier now. Marcia told her everything: the memo, the lies, the excuses. Her mother listened quietly, then said, "Baby, I've lived through enough to know that systems don't break by accident. They break where they're built weak on purpose." Marcia swallowed hard. "Then I'm going to fix it." Edna smiled faintly. "Good, but fix it loud." Across town, Naomi, the nurse, watched the same news segment and whispered a prayer. She looked at her wrist, where her own hospital band once hung, and said softly, "Lord, don't let me be afraid to care next time." The moment of disbelief wasn't when Edna collapsed. It was when the hospital defended the system that nearly erased her. It wasn't a glitch. It was a business plan dressed up as innovation. And for Marcia, that realization turned grief into purpose. Because the only thing more dangerous than a lie on paper is one that wears a barcode. Next, Marcia partners with Dr. Omar Bale to uncover the full scope of CareRank's cost-efficiency design, and the evidence that the algorithm was intentionally biased to delay treatment for the elderly and uninsured. By the end of the week, the story of the wristband that lied had left Baltimore and hit the national news. Reporters stood outside the hospital gates. Protesters carried signs that read, "No one is a low priority. We are not data points." For the first time, people were asking what Care Rank actually did, and the hospital had no simple answer. Inside a conference room on the top floor, executives sat in silence as the legal department projected headlines across a white wall. Every title screamed the same thing: AI system linked to discriminatory triage. Michael Lang rubbed his temples. "We can't let this spiral," he muttered. Dr. Green, arms folded, replied calmly, You should have thought of that before you let an algorithm decide who gets care. Lang's jaw tightened. Doctor, you're walking a fine line. I've already crossed it, Dr. Green said. Meanwhile, downstairs, Marcia sat with Dr. Omar Bell, the bioethicist who had been quietly gathering evidence for weeks. He spread out a series of printed charts on the cafeteria table. Colored graphs, dotted lines, percentages that looked harmless until you read the footnotes. This, he said, pointing to a red line at the bottom, is the average response time for patients in high-income zip codes. Then he tapped the blue line, far higher, nearly double the wait time. And this is everyone else. Marcia leaned closer. It's the same city, the same ER, and the same symptoms? He nodded. But the AI ranks one group as likely to comply and the other as resource strain. It's using geography and insurance coverage to predict who's worth the hospital's time. Marcia's voice hardened. Worth. That's the word nobody says out loud. Dr. Bell opened another folder. Internal memos he'd received from a friend inside the Care Rank development team. One in particular made Marcia's blood run cold. Reduce high-risk resource allocations in chronic care cases. Algorithm prioritizes maximizing successful outcomes per dollar spent. She stared at the sentence. That's not healthcare, that's triage by profit. Bell nodded slowly. And when you let computers manage profit, they don't just forget empathy, they make forgetting efficient. Upstairs, Lang was in crisis mode. He'd scheduled an emergency call with the hospital's parent company, Meditech Solutions, trying to frame the scandal as a misunderstanding. The local press is inflating the issue, he said into the speakerphone. We'll adjust the messaging, call it a calibration issue. A clipped voice replied, Michael, public outrage won't last forever. Let the system cool off. He hesitated. And the patients? A pause. Then, we'll handle compensation if necessary. He closed his eyes. You mean settlements. Later that afternoon, Marcia and Dr. Bell held a community meeting at the local recreation center. Folding chairs filled the gym. Elderly men and women came carrying their hospital papers, some with the same orange wristbands as Edna's. One woman raised her hand. They told me my husband wasn't critical. He died in the parking lot waiting. Another said quietly, my file says I live in a high-risk neighborhood. What does that have to do with my heart attack? Marcia looked around the room, faces full of pain and disbelief, and realized her mother's story wasn't the start of a scandal. It was the start of a pattern. When the microphone came to Edna, she stood slowly, cane in one hand, voice trembling but clear. They told me I was stable, she said, but what they really meant was I wasn't worth the rush. And if it wasn't for my daughter, I'd be another data anomaly. The room fell silent. She looked around at the crowd. You can build 1,000,000 machines, but you can't code conscience. We're not numbers, we're people, and people don't belong in tears. Applause filled the gym. It wasn't loud or angry. It was slow, steady, defiant. The next morning, a video of Edna's speech hit social media. Within hours, the hashtag #NotLowPriority was trending nationwide. People across the country shared stories of waiting too long, being overlooked, or being misclassified by smart triage. The movement caught the attention of lawmakers. Congress announced a preliminary review into AI-driven healthcare systems. At the hospital, Dr. Green resigned. He couldn't stomach another meeting where people said data optimization instead of patience. Before leaving, he left a note on Lang's desk that read, when people and policy collide, someone always bleeds. Make sure next time it's not your patients. Lang folded the note quietly and slipped it into his drawer, the first moment of guilt he'd felt in years. That night, Marcia sat at her mother's bedside again. Edna was tired but smiling. The the TV flickering with footage of senators using the words AI accountability for the first time. "They're finally talking about it," Marcia said softly. Edna chuckled. "Took 'em long enough. Maybe next they'll invent a machine that can tell the truth." Every policy sounds noble on paper until it meets a person. CareRank wasn't built to discriminate, but it learned from a system that already did. And when people and policy collided, it wasn't data that cracked, it was trust. Next, Marcia and Dr. Bell uncover a trail of corporate documents proving that the algorithm's bias wasn't accidental. It was a calculated cost-saving measure baked into the design. And they decide to take that truth to court. 3 weeks after the story broke, a manila envelope arrived at Marcia's doorstep. No return address. Just her name, handwritten in blue ink and a Baltimore postmark. Inside was a USB drive and a single note. "You were right. Start with the file called Tier C under Policy." Marcia's stomach turned. She plugged it into her laptop, heart thudding, the glow of the screen reflecting in her glasses. The first page opened with the CareRank logo, clean, corporate, sterile. Then came the words that made her blood run cold. Triage optimization through predictive cost management. Below that, another line. Reduce over-allocation of emergency resources to low-margin patient categories. She scrolled down, her jaw tightening. Charts, graphs, spreadsheets, all showing how the algorithm had been tuned not for accuracy, but for efficiency savings. The lower your insurance coverage, the lower your risk value. The older you were, the less likely your case was tagged as urgent. And if your zip code correlated with low-income neighborhoods, your entire record got colored yellow, Tier C. Marcia whispered, "They didn't just ignore us, they coded us out." She sent the files to Dr. Omar Bell, who printed them out and spread them across his office floor. For hours, the two of them sifted through internal emails, board meeting minutes, and pilot reports. One memo was dated 6 months before Edna's collapse. Subject: AI Bias Review Summary. Internal testing indicates disproportionate Tier C assignment for elderly African American patients. Recommendation: temporary rollback. Underneath, in red, another line. Rollback denied, rollout schedule fixed, delay may affect Q3 revenue. Dr. Bell leaned back in his chair. They knew. They saw the bias and they shipped it anyway. Marcia clenched her fists. So my mother's life was just a rounding error. A few pages later, they found an internal PowerPoint marked Confidential for executive eyes only. It included a slide titled Projected Cost Savings by Demographic. Under it, projected savings from reduced ER resource allocation, elderly Medicare patients 22%, Medicaid recipients 18%, private insurance high tier 0.3%. Dr. Bell exhaled sharply. They made discrimination sound like accounting. Marcia stared at the page, and they call it innovation. The next morning, Marcia met with a lawyer from the Civil Rights in Health Coalition. He read the documents in silence, his brow furrowing. When he finished, he said, "This isn't just negligence, it's systemic discrimination hidden behind automation." He looked at Marcia. "If you're willing, we can make your mother the lead plaintiff." Marcia hesitated. She's 81. She's tired. The lawyer smiled. So were a lot of people before history called them brave. That night, she told Edna about the lawsuit over dinner. Her mother listened quietly, stirring her tea. "So you're taking them to court?" she asked. "Yes, Mama. They need to answer for this." Edna smiled faintly. "Good. Just remember, baby, you're not fighting machines. You're fighting the people who hide behind them. A week later, the Washington Ledger ran a headline across its front page. Hospital algorithm intentionally ranked Black and elderly patients lower, documents show. The subheadline read, Company projected millions in savings by reprioritizing care. News cameras camped outside CareRank's headquarters. Executives ducked behind tinted car windows. Lawmakers began drafting subpoenas. In Baltimore, Marcia's phone rang nonstop. Reporters, lawyers, activists, all wanting a quote. She gave the same answer every time. I don't want revenge. I want accountability. At a press conference a few days later, Dr. Bell stood before the microphones. He held up a copy of the leaked memo and read aloud. Rolled back denied. Delay may affect Q3 revenue. Then he looked straight at the cameras. This is what bias looks like in the age of AI. It doesn't shout, it calculates. Applause rippled through the crowd. That evening, Edna watched the coverage from her living room. The image of her daughter flashed across the screen, calm, determined, speaking for them both. Edna whispered, "You go, baby." She leaned back and smiled weakly. It's funny. All my life, I thought progress meant faster machines. Turns out, it just means slower lies. Days later, Marcia received another anonymous email. The subject line read, For court, read this carefully. Attached was a final report titled, CareRank ROI Assessment, Internal Only. The last line hit her like a punch. System predicts minimal litigation exposure. Elderly populations unlikely to file formal complaints. She read it twice, then a third time. Her hands shook. She whispered, They were counting on us to stay quiet. The paper trail didn't just reveal bias, it revealed intent. Behind every efficiency model was a decision about whose life was profitable and whose wasn't. Edna's near death wasn't an error. It was a forecast. And this time, the numbers were about to face the truth. Next, Marcia's lawsuit explodes into a national case, the Brooks v. CareRank trial, forcing hospitals, tech companies, and Congress to confront the question no algorithm can answer. What is a life worth when the math says otherwise? By spring, the lawsuit Brooks v. CareRank had grown bigger than anyone expected. What began as one elderly woman's near-death experience became the loudest case in the country about how machines treat humanity. Outside Baltimore General Hospital, protesters stood shoulder to shoulder. Church elders, nurses, veterans, and parents, all wearing orange hospital wristbands in solidarity. Each band had the words Tier C, not anymore, printed in bold black letters. The chant rose through the streets like a heartbeat. We are not data. We are not data. Inside, Marcia watched from her mother's hospital room window. Edna smiled faintly, her voice soft but steady. They finally learned how to make noise. Marcia nodded. Yeah, Mama, but this time it's the kind that can't be ignored. Across the nation, more stories began surfacing. In Detroit, a man with diabetes lost his foot after CareRank flagged him as low risk. In Atlanta, a woman with chest pain waited 5 hours because her recovery probability was under 50%. In Kansas City, an entire senior care center discovered that all their residents had been automatically classified as Tier C. The data spoke loud, but the faces behind it spoke louder. Not low priority became a movement. People started wearing their old wristbands as symbols of protest, like war medals in a fight for dignity. Television panels debated the issue nightly. Some tech CEOs defended their creations, calling them learning systems still in progress. Others, mostly doctors, shook their heads and said what Marcia already knew. The systems weren't learning, they were repeating. A viral post from a Black physician read, "The algorithm doesn't see race. It sees the results of racism and treats them as facts. The comment section filled with stories from nurses who'd watched patients wait too long because the computer said so. Congress scheduled hearings within weeks. Edna was invited to testify, but her health was still fragile, so Marcia went in her place. Standing before the microphone in a navy blue suit, she began. My mother's wristband said non-urgent. That tag wasn't just wrong, it was deadly. And every day since, I've met people wearing the same label in different hospitals. She held up one of the orange bands, letting it dangle from her fingers. This, she said, is what inequality looks like now. Not a denial letter, not a closed door. Just a barcode deciding you can wait. The room fell silent. Even the senator stopped taking notes. Dr. Omar Bell testified next, presenting charts from the leaked documents. For decades, he said, we've been told that data is neutral. But data only mirrors the society it's built from. If history undervalued Black lives, then algorithms will do the same, quietly, efficiently, and without remorse. He paused, looking up from his papers. Efficiency without empathy is erasure. Those words trended online before he even left the room. A few days later, the story hit international headlines. The United Nations released a statement calling the case a landmark moment in the ethics of artificial intelligence. News anchors replayed clips of Edna and Marcia side by side, mother and daughter, one saved by chance, the other determined to save everyone else. Some stories, the reporter said, change how we think about technology. This one changed how we define humanity. At the same time, CareRank executives faced growing pressure. They issued a carefully worded apology, blaming unintended algorithmic bias and promising swift corrective action. But the damage was done. Hospitals across America suspended their AI triage programs. A handful of states began writing laws to prevent automated priority scoring. And in Baltimore, a mural appeared across from the hospital entrance. A giant painted wristband unspooling into a heartbeat line with the words, "Some lives were never low priority." Edna saw it on the evening news and smiled. "Well, I'll be," she whispered. "They turned my mistake into art." Marcia laughed. "You're more famous than Beyoncé now." Edna smirked. "Child, Beyoncé can keep the music. I'll take the justice." The next morning, a letter arrived from the Department of Health. The opening line read, "We are conducting a federal review of AI-driven medical systems for compliance with civil rights law." Marcia exhaled deeply, clutching the paper. They're finally treating this like more than a malfunction. Her mother nodded. "That's because you made them see it wasn't a glitch, baby. It was a pattern." By summer, the class action suit reached over 11,000 plaintiffs. Every name told the same story. They'd waited, they'd trusted, they'd been marked low priority. And now they wanted the world to remember them, not as victims, but as proof that silence had consequences. When truth grows louder than excuses, change begins to listen. CareRank was never just a machine. It was a mirror. And once people saw their reflection in it, they refused to go unseen again. Next, the courtroom becomes the new battleground, as Brooks v. CareRank opens before a national audience. And Edna herself takes the stand to deliver one of the most powerful testimonies Congress has ever heard. The courtroom was silent when Edna Brooks entered. She walked slowly, leaning on her cane, her orange hospital wristband still around her wrist, the same one she'd refused to take off since that night. The crowd stood instinctively. Cameras flashed. Reporters whispered. Marcia helped her sit at the witness stand, adjusting the microphone. "Mr. Brooks," the judge said gently, "you understand you're under oath?" Edna nodded. "Yes, Your Honor. Been telling the truth my whole life. No reason to stop now." A few quiet chuckles broke the tension. When the questioning began, the defense attorney tried to sound polite, rehearsed. Mr. Brooks, care rank is a complex system. It's not meant to discriminate, only to manage resources efficiently. You understand that, don't you? Edna looked at him calmly. I understand machines don't have hearts. People do. And somebody made that machine the way it is. The lawyer shifted. But you can't say for certain the system intended to harm you. Edna leaned forward, voice steady. No, baby. The system didn't intend to harm me. It just didn't care if it did. A murmur spread through the gallery. Marcia sat behind her mother, fighting tears. Every word landed heavier than the last. Not angry, just honest. The lawyer continued. Mr. Brooks, your file shows you received full treatment after the incident, correct? Edna nodded slowly. I sure did, after I stopped breathing. The courtroom went silent again. Next, Dr. Omar Bell took the stand, presenting the data they'd uncovered. He showed charts of wait times, patient outcomes, and the now infamous Tier C policy.pdf. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, this isn't negligence. It's math with morals missing. He pointed to one slide labeled Predictive Efficiency Savings, Low-Income Regions. The algorithm's creators didn't test for bias. They monetized it. He turned toward the jury. When you call something efficient, ask who it's efficient for. Outside the courthouse, crowds gathered again. Signs read, Efficiency is not humanity. Every breath deserves priority. One banner had Edna's face next to the words, The woman who made the machine listen. During closing arguments, Marcia's lawyer stood before the jury and held up an orange wristband. This isn't technology, he said. It's a decision, one made by people hiding behind a computer screen. The machine didn't choose to undervalue these patients. Executives did when they told it what to learn. He paused. If Edna Brooks can survive 3 hours in a waiting room and still stand here today, the least we can do is make sure no one else ever has to. When the verdict came 2 days later, the courtroom was packed. The judge's voice was calm but firm. In the matter of Brooks v. Care Rank, this court finds the defendants liable for willful negligence and systemic discrimination under the Civil Rights Act. He looked over his glasses. This judgment is not just about technology. It's about the moral duty to see those who've been invisible for too long. Applause broke out as reporters rushed to the doors. The case's outcome didn't just bring justice, it brought reform. Within months, Congress passed the Fair Triage Act, with its central piece known nationwide as the Brooks Clause. It required 1. Human oversight for every AI triage decision. 2. Transparency in how algorithms weigh socioeconomic data. 3. Independent audits for bias every 6 months. 4. Patient appeals allowing anyone to request a human reevaluation. Hospitals began printing a new line on every patient wristband. Priority status, human verified. The president signed the act surrounded by nurses, doctors, and patients. Edna was there too, sitting in the front row. When the pen was handed to her for a ceremonial signature, she chuckled. Never thought I'd see the day a woman my age gets her name in federal ink. The president smiled. You didn't just get your name in ink, Mrs. Brooks. You got it written in policy. Back home that night, Edna sat on her porch, the same cane resting beside her chair. The news replayed footage from the signing ceremony, her face filling the screen. She shook her head, half smiling. Lord, I was just trying to get a doctor to listen. Marcia handed her a cup of tea. And now the whole country is. They sat in silence for a moment, listening to the soft buzz of summer cicadas. Edna sighed. Feels good to breathe again. Not just air, but peace. The Brooks Clause didn't fix everything, but it changed the question. No longer can AI make care faster. Now, can it make care fair? For the first time, technology had to pass the same test as people. Could it be taught to care? Next, the story comes full circle, as Edna returns to the hospital one last time, and the same system that once failed her now greets her with words that prove what she fought for wasn't in vain. A year later, the hospital lobby looked nothing like the place that nearly killed her. The same gray tile floors, the same soft beeps and whispers, but something in the air had changed. There were posters on the walls now. Your pain matters. Ask for human verification. Protected under the Brooks Clause. And right by the check-in counter, a framed quote that read, "We don't let computers speak first anymore." Edna Brooks. Edna stood in line for her follow-up appointment, holding her cane in one hand and a folder of papers in the other. She didn't need much help breathing these days, but she liked to keep up with her doctors. "Old habits die slower than I do," she liked to say. When the nurse printed her new wristband, Edna watched it slide out of the machine with a soft click. She turned it over slowly. In bold black letters, it read, "Priority status, human verified." The nurse smiled. "Looks like the system learned something, Mrs. Brooks." Edna smiled back. "Good. Maybe it's finally learning manners." As she waited for her appointment, she saw a young woman across the room, early 30s, holding her grandmother's hand. The older woman looked scared, clutching her chest. The nurse scanned her chart, then said, "You're next, ma'am. We'll get you seen right away." The granddaughter blinked, surprised. "Already? I thought we'd be waiting hours." The nurse shook her head. "Not anymore." Edna watched quietly, her heart warming. For the first time in a long while, she felt safe in this building. Dr. Green walked in a few minutes later. He'd returned after the lawsuit, newly promoted as Chief of Patient Equity. He smiled when he saw her. "Well, look who's saving lives without lifting a finger." Edna grinned. "You mean saving you from that algorithm mess again?" He chuckled. "You did more than that. You reminded us that technology is supposed to serve people, not replace them." She leaned back in her chair. "About time y'all figured that out. Took a whole year and a few gray hairs." He nodded. "And a very patient teacher." Outside the hospital, a news crew was setting up for a segment about the Brooks Clause's anniversary. They interviewed nurses, doctors, and patients. One nurse said, "It's not perfect yet, but at least we get to question the screen now. We get to look people in the eye again." Another said, "When I scan a wristband and see that human verification label, I remember her story. It keeps me honest." That evening, Marcia drove her mother home. The car was quiet except for the hum of the engine and the faint sound of gospel radio. Marcia said, "You know, Mama, they're talking about adding your name to a nursing scholarship at Johns Hopkins, the Edna Brooks Fellowship for Healthcare Equity." Edna blinked. "A scholarship? For what? Being hard-headed?" Marcia laughed. "For being brave." Edna smiled softly. "Lord, all I did was tell the truth." "Exactly," Marcia said, "and that's what makes it rare." When they got home, the porch light was already on. The evening air carried the smell of rain and honeysuckle. Edna sat in her old chair, the one that creaked like a friendly memory. Across the street, a group of teenagers were hanging posters for a community health fair. She could see her own face printed on the flyers, smiling, determined. Beneath it, the words, "Fair Care, Human Care, the Brooks Clause, 1 year strong." Edna chuckled. "Didn't think I'd end up on a poster next to a blood pressure booth." Marcia grinned. "Better that than a waiting room." They both laughed. The kind of laugh that comes from surviving something you never should have had to. Later that night, Edna took off her new wristband and set it on the table beside her chair. She traced her finger over the black letters. Human verified. She whispered to herself, "That's all I ever wanted." She looked up at the stars through her window, eyes glistening. For everyone to count, for everyone to matter. On the TV, the news anchor closed the nightly broadcast with a simple line. A year after the Brooks Clause was signed into law, hospitals across the country report shorter wait times and more equitable care. And it all started with one woman who refused to let a machine decide her worth. Edna smiled, shaking her head. Guess the computer finally learned to listen. Change rarely comes in thunder. Sometimes it starts with a whisper, a quiet voice saying, "I'm still here." Edna Brooks' fight didn't just fix a system. It reminded the world that humanity should never be optional. Her story became a promise, one written not in data, but in dignity. The Brooks Clause, 2039. No one is a low priority. If this story moved you, share it. Because every time someone listens, another life gets seen. Subscribe to Older Black Person Stories, When Data Meets Dignity, for more true stories about courage, bias, and the fight to stay visible in a world built on numbers.